The moment Israel took control of Jerusalem, there was an argument. A political argument. See, in the United States, a sacred site, as opposed to a building for worship, is administered by the government and not specifically by those for whom the site is sacred. So Native American sacred sites such as Devil's Tower in Wyoming or Mount Shasta in California are administered by government bodies and not necessarily by Native Americans themselves. But in Israel, the thinking has always been different. So if we think that the Kotel is a national site or a national monument with no particular sanctity, like Mount Rushmore or the Lincoln Memorial, then it should be administered by the National Parks Authority. But if the Kotel is a religious site, a sacred place, then it should be administered by those who deal in sanctity, for those for whom the sanctity has meaning, people who deal in religion. So almost immediately after winning a crazy war that lasted only 6 days, after pretty much doubling the size of the entire country, the Israeli government now has to decide whether responsibility for the Kotel be given to the National Parks authorities or to the Ministry of Religion. Remember, this wasn't a religious decision. This was a political decision taken by politicians about a place of religious significance. And the political battle was won by the Ministry of Religion. And authority over the Kotel was granted to religious authority rather than secular government. And by the way, in Israel, there has never been a Ministry of Religion not run by an Orthodox religious Jew. And one of the first acts of the ministry is to put up a mechitzah, a boundary fence, to designate the men's and the women's area. The Prime Minister of the time, Levi Eshkol, was unimpressed by what he called a cattle pen, allowing women only a quarter of the space available. And nor was the World Union of Progressive Judaism particularly happy that egalitarian services were banned. Men are over on that side, women are over on this side. But the die was cast. The political decision had been to hand over the Kotel to religious authorities. And Israeli politics also dictated that its religious authorities were run by, and in large part for, Orthodox Jews. The Minister of Religion, Zerach Verheftig, reacted angrily to Eshkol's disdain, and in a news interview he conducted, he pointed out that there is a difference between a Jew that comes to the Kotel to pray and the Jew who comes to have their picture taken. The headline says, "The Kotel will not be a monument or a museum." So it was a political decision to give control of the Kotel to the Ministry of Religion, and it is a political decision not to change this arrangement. In 1988, the first International Jewish Feminist Conference takes place in Jerusalem, and they hold services at the Kotel and are met with verbal and physical assaults. And that's pretty much when Women of the Wall was established. So the following year, the Ministry of Justice passes a new law that any religious ceremony at a holy place that is not in accordance with the custom of the holy site and which offends the sensibilities of the worshippers at the place is punishable by 6 months in jail. And make no mistake about it, when the law talks about the custom of the site, they're talking about Orthodox custom and the sensitivities of the Orthodox worshippers. The issue doesn't go away. So there are demonstrations, there are counter-demonstrations, there are Supreme Court appeals, there are even arrests. This in the background is an image of Anat Hoffman, the leader of Women of the Wall, arrested for carrying a Sefer Torah in the women's section at the Kotel. And then in 2013, there's a Supreme Court ruling which says women can pray and wear talitot at the Kotel. And that's when the government begins to move. Naftali Bennett, who we've met as Prime Minister, back in 2013, he was the Minister for Jerusalem and for Diaspora Affairs. And listening to the suggestions of others, he takes a look at the Western Wall, Mughrabi Bridge. What's over the other side of the Mughrabi Bridge is a continuation of the same wall. It just looks like it's a different wall because the Mughrabi Bridge is in the way. So Bennett talks about a continuation of the Western Wall, the same wall of the ancient Second Temple, just a bit south. There's the north, there's the south. And orders there to be built a deck, a prayer platform which is raised up above the archaeological dig underneath it, which has access to the wall, the southern bit of the same wall. Here you can see the Mughrabi Bridge from the northern side and from the southern side, so that you can get your bearings. The response of Anat Hoffman, who's just recently been arrested for bringing a Sefer Torah into the northern bit of the Western Wall. A sunbathing deck, a way of building a second-rate wall for second-rate Jews, says Anat Hoffman. But negotiations begin. And after 3 years of intense negotiations between all the parties involved, the government cabinet secretary Avichai Mandelblit, the Jewish Agency for Israel, Jewish Federations of North America, the Masorti movement, the Reform movement, Women of the Wall, the Rabbi of the Kotel, the Minister of Religious Affairs and the Minister of Justice. And after 3 years, they come out with this agreement. First of all, there will be what they call one Kotel for one people. There will be one entryway into both the traditional Kotel and the Robinson's Arch Kotel, such that one will not have less prestige from the other. So here's the entranceway to the Kotel as it stands at the moment. You've got a men's entrance, you've got a women's entrance, but that's only to the northern bit of the Kotel. The Robinson's Arch bit of the Kotel, the entrance is some way back, kind of hidden. So the idea is that you would have 3 entrances, men, women and mixed, and that would lead you into north and south. Secondly, there would be 2 prayer plazas, one northern and a southern plaza at Robinson's Arch. So here is the northern bit. There's Mughrabi Bridge. And Robinson's Arch now has a much larger platform and will be called Ezrat Yisrael. There's the Ezrat Nashim for the women, and here you'll have Ezrat Yisrael for all of Israel. There'll be a governing commission which will include representatives of the conservative movement and the reform movement. And there will be budgets for establishing and administering the Ezrat Yisrael as well. All sides agreed to this compromise, and after some 3 years of intense negotiation, it was voted through in government. But 2 months later, March 2016, the ultra-Orthodox parties threatened to leave the coalition, thereby bringing down the government and forcing new elections, unless the Kotel compromise was put on indefinite hold. Prime Minister Netanyahu is faced with a political decision. There he is. He's busy battling what for him is a hostile US President Obama about Iran. He's working on holding his coalition together in order to further his promises to his electorate. And suddenly he's confronted by an issue that he doesn't see as crucial. So he agrees to put the Kotel compromise on ice. And no Israeli government since has moved to vote on this agreement. At the end of the day, this deep issue at the heart of American Jewish identity is held in limbo because of Israel's democratic system. If the Israeli public felt strongly enough about the subject, the Kotel agreement could be implemented tomorrow. And this is not to say that Israelis don't care about pluralism. According to polling, some 63% of Israeli Jews support an egalitarian section at the Kotel. It's just that only 11% of them thought that this was a high priority matter. Other issues are more important for them. And here we are at the end of the summer of 2022, thinking about the spirituality of the Kotel, but actually we're back talking about our electoral sliding scales. It's just more important to the ultra-Orthodox. And yet, we're not getting the full picture, because on this sliding scale also includes most Jewish Americans who feel just as strongly about the makeup of the Kotel as the ultra-Orthodox do in Israel. The difference is, of course, that the folks underneath the line get a vote, and the folks above the line don't get a vote. And it doesn't matter that the ultra-Orthodox in Israel make up maybe 1/5 of the electorate. The key is that they think it's important, they'll fight for it, and no matter how many Jewish Americans there are, they don't get a vote. So there we are at the heart of the Jewish people living in Israel and the Jewish people living without Israel. The Kotel is central to the Jewish people. But what we've also learnt is that we fought in order to have any form of autonomy over the Kotel. It's in our hands because there was a war. And the key aspect of it is that it's in a very particular place, in a very particular country. While in the Reform world many of us will call our synagogues temple, in a sense that's a small t. The large T temple, there was only one of them, and it was in Jerusalem, and the Kotel is its outer wall. But when it comes down to it, all decisions about what happens, who does what, at the Kotel, north or south, all this is about Israel's democracy and the way that the people of Israel make decisions.